need to do something substantial in order to get the attention of the clubs.
Why?
Because they're exclusive and fun, and they lead to a better life. People want to go on the internet and check out their friends, so why not build a website that offers that friend's picture?
Do you know why you're here, Evie Hammond? You're being formally charged with conspiracy to commit treason, terrorism, and sedition, the penalty for which is death by firing squad. You have one chance, and only one chance, to save your life. You must tell us the identity or whereabouts of Codename V. Do you understand what I'm telling you?
Yes.
Are you ready to cooperate?
No.
Ask, there's more than flesh. There is an idea, Mr. Creepy, and ideas are bulletproof. Remember.
Hey everyone, welcome to Real Time in Tech. I'm your host, Rico, and here's my associate, Javier. Today we'll be looking at 3 films: Minority Report, V for Vendetta, and The Social Network.
More specifically, we'll be looking at the ways in which these films portray their central character equation involved to make sure we, as an audience, identify with those characters.
Well put.
The focus for this week stems from an analysis of the Juan Jose Iguarda article entitled Identification with Characters and Narrative Persuasion Through the Fictional Feature Films, which formulates that the audience's emotional response to a film is tied directly to their ability to relate or sympathize with the characters that we see on screen.
As we do every week, we will chronicle each film and give you a little bit of input on what these films are actually about. Hope you enjoy. We'll be back with you in 2 seconds.
What we're going to talk about today is how the article went about researching this hypothesis, and whether the films we have here today attempt to use forms of persuasion to elicit a greater emotional response from the viewers. Before we move on to a more specific analysis of how each film interacts with the article, let's outline some of the core concepts touched upon in the text and how we can apply those threads to some of the other things that we've talked about so far. Iguarda's article really stresses the importance of empirical evidence they gathered through a thorough survey process wherein they attempted to evaluate the relationship that exists between the audience emotional response to a film and the amount in which the audience connected with the characters of that film. The first hypothesis we're talking about states individuals who identify more with characters will enjoy the film more. That can be found on page 7 of Iguarda's article.
Right, Rico, and where I think the article really falls short is in its limitations. I applaud the author for trying to measure a seemingly immeasurable factor, but there's a multitude of factors that go into how I feel about a film once I come out on the other side. Not sure I agree with them on this one.
Exactly. Let's not get sidetracked, you know? Like, the authors go on to say another hypothesis, like, to the extent that the viewers identify with the characters in dramatic film, they'll experience a greater increase in negative affect from viewing the film.
Right. Now, how do you feel about this one, Rico?
Well, I guess I can kind of agree with it. It's a really tough call, hit or miss. I think, generally speaking, when you're talking about a film and somebody who relates to the character, they're going to like it.
I think I'm in agreement with you there. Finally, we get to the third hypothesis of the article, wherein the authors state that to the extent that viewers identify with the characters in a dramatic film, they will experience greater elaboration during viewing. And just to clarify, when talking about elaboration, the authors of the article meant levels of personal reflection.
Again, Javier, I'm not sure how I feel about that one. Let's see how the text interacts with the films we've chosen to examine before making a final verdict, alright?
Let's get to it. Well, we found that Iguarda's article was fashioned in a rather narrow-minded sense, in that it focused primarily on the empirical data gathered and left little room for analysis and critical thinking. It did provide some interesting information on the ways in which we, as individuals, identify with movie characters. For example, in the first study outlined in the text, nearly 93% of 300 surveyed individuals felt as though they were very similar to the characters of the film shown, while 85% thought they would feel comfortable living as those characters. These numbers, staggering in their encompassing nature, illustrate the effectiveness and persuasiveness of the contemporary film industry. Furthermore, using a formula created for the purpose of their research, Iguarda formulated that a significant portion of the enjoyment gained from the movie-watching experiences stems from the individual's ability to connect with the characters they see on screen. To illustrate the effects of this, Rico will discuss David Fincher's film, The Social Network, and how the fictionalization of Mark Zuckerberg assists in creating a much more relatable, three-dimensional character for the audience to empathize with.
Yeah, for sure. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, we're all around that these days, aren't we? I think it's pretty clear we're dealing with a heavily fictionalized version of Mark Zuckerberg in this movie, Javier. Screenwritten Aaron Sorkin readily admitted on several occasions, most notably in an interview with the New York Times Magazine, that he didn't want his fidelity to be the truth. He wanted it to be storytelling. He really admits that he embellished Zuckerberg's story in an attempt to create a better movie, and it thus verified many of those concepts in which Iguarta Argaura's article touches upon empirically.
Well, I think you're absolutely right there, Rico, and I think we're seeing a level of persuasion here that we don't see in many other places. No matter how often a studio may claim that what you're seeing is based on a true story, you always have to wonder, right? Much like the authors of the Iguarda article discovered, it is much more easy for a film to be emotionally resonant when the audience is faced with relatable characters. The fictionalization of Mark Zuckerberg for the purposes of this film is a prime example of the levels of narrative persuasion we see evident in contemporary cinema, wouldn't you agree?
Oh, for sure. We're used so many tactics get out of this to persuade us to enjoy a film, and being able to relate to Zuckerberg here is just another way of doing that. But it did make for a pretty good movie, I don't know, don't you think?
Well, I gotta agree with you on that one. It was a very enjoyable film. I love the soundtrack as well. I'm not a Nine Inch Nails fan by any means, but I really think Trent Reznor hit it out of the park on this one. Good movie, and I'll give it 4 out of 5 stars.
You know what? I'm gonna have to give it 3 out of 5. I didn't really like how they portrayed Zuckerberg. I think it was really fictionalized, and the fact that they're trying to manipulate an audience in that way just didn't really strike a chord with me. But in saying that, let's move on to our next film, Minority Report.
What most people don't know about Minority Report is that it, like just about every other relevant sci-fi movie made in the last 20 years or so, is based on the novel by famed science fiction author Philip K. Dick. Originally entitled To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, Minority Report focuses on the actions of John Anderton as he attempts to solve a forthcoming murder of which he's been accused. You know what, Rico? That's a damn good question. Do androids dream of electric sheep?
Well, a couple weeks ago I dressed up like an android. It wasn't for Halloween or anything, I just felt like having fun. Passed out, drank a bit too much, and I did have a dream of some electric sheep, which is the ironic thing, so I guess it makes sense.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right there. And moving on, I think with this film that you're seeing the effects of the second and third hypotheses mentioned in the article played out on screen.
Absolutely, Javi. I'm glad you mentioned that. Even though we're dealing with a fictional scenario here, it's easy to see the way the film is fashioned to reality to tie in those human threads. It's easy to sympathize with a father who has lost a son, and it's even easier to root for him and find a release from that sort of pain. Iguarta's article formulated that narrative persuasion also plays a role in audiences' assessment of a film, and I think that's pretty evident here. We aren't just rooting for Anderson to find out what happened to his son, we're rooting for him to survive. He finds himself in dire straits, and as the dramatic intensity of the film rises, so does the potential for an emotional catharsis at the conclusion of the film.
Exactly, Rico, and I really like how you put that. The Iguarda article really pressed the idea that our ability to enjoy a film is tied heavily to what kind of emotions that film awakens within us, and I think Minority Report is a prime example of that. It's an emotional roller coaster ride through a futuristic theme park, leaving us feeling hopeful, despondent, claustrophobic, and in awe throughout the course of its tenure on screen. I'm going to go ahead and say it ties directly with what we're talking about today, and I'm going to go ahead and give it 3.5 stars for its scope, vision, and its emotional availability.
I'm going to have to go ahead and disagree with you on this one again. I'm going to give it 4.5. I really enjoyed the film. Visually, it was stunning. The story was there to support its graphics, and it really just held my attention for the entirety of the film, and something Iguarda would argue that is a way that filmmakers use to tempt their audiences, really getting you involved with the characters, and I think it did a great job. But in saying that, let's move on. V for Vendetta.
Yeah, Rico, gotta say, I'm a huge fan of the film in general, and I'm an even bigger fan of the ways it ties into what we're talking about today. Now, while it doesn't directly apply to the previously aforementioned hypotheses, I'm gonna go in a different direction here. The fourth and fifth hypotheses discussed in the article suggest that a strong emotional response to the characters or plot of a film can lead to a change in opinions surrounding a critical aspect of that film. In the article, the authors found empirical evidence to suggest that the viewing of a film that portrayed Mexican immigration in a positive light directly correlated with a positive response to the subject after viewing. Now, I may not have any empirical evidence to back me up, but I feel pretty comfortable in saying that I've seen many more Guy Fawkes masks around after this film was released than I did before. Wouldn't you?
I absolutely agree. And I really love the way he related it to the movie about the Mexican immigrant. Getting the audience to tie into the fact that they feel sympathy, they feel compassion for this person. And when they left the film, the survey really showed that they really felt strongly towards letting Mexicans be in their country, which was the whole premise of the film.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely agree with that. And I think this film is a prime example of how a movie can act as a catalyst for the positive reinforcement of a previously forgotten or controversial subject. I think a really interesting study could be made that tracks the ripple effect of a film like this, one that has such a contagious and moving message. If I can, though, I'm going to tie this back to the first few hypotheses as well. A little background research on this movie helped us realize that it was dramatically different from its source material, and it really stands to show the levels of persuasion that Iguarda touches upon in his article.
Oh, really? Well, by all means, educate us.
I usually am, Rico. Alan Moore, the author of the original source material, actually chose not to have his name included in the credits of this film, instead choosing to disown it due to the very levels of persuasion we're talking about now. In the original graphic novel, V wasn't a freedom fighter. In fact, he was a much more criminally inclined anarchist. You see what I'm getting at? Freedom is a much more socially applicable subject than anarchy, and as such, V was reformed with a new vendetta, if you will, in hopes that American audiences would find him to be a more sympathetic character.
Well, I can't deny that. I'm a huge fan of this movie, and I'd readily give it 4.5 again out of 5. It's interesting to note, though, that the filmmakers chose the alter character so significantly in hopes of eliciting a more positive response from the audience. That's exactly what the article is talking about. Maybe Iguartua's article was onto something after all.
You've got to assume so, Rico.
Well, I hope we've given you some valid points about Juan Jose's insights into these 3 films. I don't know how you feel about it exactly, but it's something to consider.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think that we really covered all of our bases here with this one. And, you know, I'm a big fan of all 3 films.
Absolutely. And please tune in next week to experience Carlon. 2 dynamic pieces of film work. We got The Princess Diaries
And the Notebook.
and The Notebook for you.
Yeah, it's gonna
Oh, I almost forgot. It's question of the week time.
Oh,
Don't forget, email your responses and we'll play the best one on air. Our questions this week will come up for you in 2 seconds. Contact us at the email address and you can be played on air live. Thanks for tuning in. And always keep it real.
Oh,